Hey y'all. Happy new moon. Karlyn, there you are. Does that work? Hey.
Hello.
Hello. Happy new moon.
Happy new moon. I'm trying
How,
to. There we go. Okay.
how are you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Do you do anything for the new moon?
I haven't yet. No, I don't. The last few moon cycles, I honestly have just been like, I have just been chilling. Usually, so I actually am a part of a coven, and so usually we would do full moon and new moon rituals where we would like sit down with each other. We would like do intention setting and stuff like that, and they were a lot of fun, but they were very intense, just like energetically. And so we have like shifted from kind of doing those things to doing like solo stuff, and I have really just been leaning into like, where's my body right now? What do I feel called to do? And so for the last few moon cycles, I really have just been asked to like just sit with myself and just kind of like relax and like not feel the pressure to do like a huge spectacle for moon stuff.
Totally. Totally. I feel like that call to just relax and not perform a big ceremony or like do a big thing is kind of like a theme of the astrology this year. And like I know we've talked about this before, like with what's happening with Capricorn and um all the aspects that everything in Libra right now is making a Capricorn has been kind of bringing that up a lot for me too, around like balance, and especially like the inner state of balance and kind of what that feels like. um because I have a lot of ideas a lot of the time about like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, and then it gets
And
to
it's
the
going to be
actual
great and
moment.
it's going to be wonderful. And then you're like, I
Yeah,
have no energy for any of this.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And then it's like, okay, what's actually real right now, like what's authentic?
Yes. And I think that that's like the thing that is, and so for those of you who are tuning in, hi, I'm Karlyn. I have a whole bunch of Capricorn placements. So I have, I think, 5 placements stacked in my first house, and my first house is also in Capricorn. So I'm just like, I want to do everything, right? And it's like, I think getting to a place where I'm learning to balance the ambition of like, what does it mean to be ambitious? And like, how do I do that in a way that is, sorry, I'm moving. I'm like, my face is dripping, my hair is still wet. So, how do I do that in a way where I am keeping the ambitions in a way that doesn't become overwhelming, but like still holding on to them, right? Not saying, oh, I have to settle for these things, but I think making those ambitious things into like better bite-sized pieces.
Yeah,
Because it's like
yeah,
maybe one day I have this super extravagant um, moon ritual 5 years from now when I have the time and the resources to do it, right? But it doesn't have to happen today.
right. I hear you. I'm a Leo Sun, Leo rising, and I've been thinking a lot about Jupiter. I was listening to Sam Reynolds on the Astrology podcast yesterday, doing an episode on Jupiter, and I have Jupiter trine with my Sun, and that this like idea of like bigger, better, expansion, yes, like how great is it going to be, is like so intrinsic to my nature and to my personality. And one thing I've been definitely feeling like as I get older is a lot of the time, like expansion actually happens when I come inward. And I have like all of these visions of like what a thing is going to be. And then a lot of the time, I'll put a lot of energy into those visions, but then they become kind of like accessory to the point, like
Yeah.
peripheral to the point. And really what's important is whatever the process is around like ideating them or imagining them or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. I have so I was thinking of, I was like, what are we going to talk about today, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, so many things like have come to me in the last like couple of hours where I was like, okay, like what the fuck am I going to say? Because the thing for me is a lot of the way that I like understand astrology is like intuitively, and so it's like when I'm in the moment, I'm just like, okay, suddenly all of these things are clicking for me, and I know like what it means, what it is.
For sure.
So one of the things that I was thinking about, or that was actually thinking about a lot of things. So I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts, and so I feel like with all of the various things that are going on, that one of the things that the Libra full moon is wanting for us to think about, and then also us being in Libra season, and then just some of the other transits that are going on, is, and I was actually listening to your offerings last night too, and there was when you went back to something that you had said a while ago about retrogrades, about the RE, because I remember I actually had noted that, and I was just like, this is good. And so I feel like we have been in this very huge phase of like reflection in general, and I think that we're having a hard time seeing it as reflection because all of us collectively are not in the spaces where we're looking at things from like a long period of time to see like, oh, this is a reflective period. And so what I mean by that is like, so I'm going to bring in something that I've been listening to. So I've been listening to this podcast called You're Wrong About, and it is hosted by Michael Hobbs and Sarah Marshall. And so they are both journalists. And what they have been doing is they've been visiting like historical events, and like it can be like historical events. Usually, I think they're all in the United States, and they're like, here is like what the media narrative was. Here's kind of what the social narrative became, but like here's what actually happened, right? And so much of what basically every episode is like, we basically actually don't know anything. We actually have been wrong about a whole bunch of shit, and us coming to the wrong conclusion has led to us making wrong decisions from that wrong conclusion. And so they're kind of, it's interesting because like for me as like a political scientist, I'm just like, this is actually just like this is really just like, here's how we ended up with all of these horrible policy decisions, and kind of like why we are in this political social moment that we're in. But that's like only a part of it, right? And so it's been interesting to listen to them, and I'm just like, oh, okay, them making this podcast and me having the time to be able to listen to them is actually helping paint a more complete picture for me of why we're where we are currently, and like how we really truly got here, right? Because I think that a lot of us, we have like bits and pieces, and I also feel like that is reflective though of Libra as a totem, right? Because Libra is the mirror, and it is the sister sign to Aries, and Aries is the self. And I think that we are in this very weird moment of this like individual versus the collective, and we are favoring the individual over the collective to the detriment of both, though, right? Because we can't see that we need to look at both. Yes, it is important for us as individuals to have agency, but it's also important for us as individuals to like be in community with one another, and to be sharing information, and to be sharing resources, because that's how we get like fuller pictures of things, when we're like, oh, here's what I heard, or here's what I know about this situation, about this thing. And then we're able to kind of like see it fuller and then hopefully come to better conclusions, right? And then hopefully build better things.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I love all that. Would it be okay if I like backtrack a little bit just to speak an astrological framework? Because I
Yes.
feel like everything that you just said is so on point for the planetary symbolism. And so, yeah, for folks that are joining, hello. I'm here today with Karlyn, who is my esteemed guest, and um, we're talking about today's new moon, but also Mercury retrograde, that's kind of encompassing today's new moon, and then several events that are happening around the new moon, that I'll speak to in a second. So I love what you were just saying about kind of like recognizing how things have become what they are. And like this inquiry into the narratives that have been adopted and embodied, and then a kind of necessary restructuring or reframing of them in order to move forward and to have like a more complete, coherent sense of where we are now,
Yes.
based on how we got here. So Mercury is retrograde currently in the sign of Libra. Amongst other things, Libra represents the scales of justice and is often associated with the law and with people who make judicial decisions or legal decisions. Mercury represents a thought process of some kind. And so in a retrograde, we're kind of like rethinking or revising. Karlyn mentioned the RE prefix, which is so helpful and fun to use with retrogrades. But Mercury stationed retrograde on the 26th of September, and it's stationed retrograde in a square with Pluto in Capricorn. And Pluto in Capricorn it's a long transit. Pluto has a 248-year cycle around the sun. And so currently Pluto is transiting Capricorn, which is the sign that it was in when the Declaration of Independence was signed. And so for people who are like interested in their Saturn return or, Venus return, which are like planetary returns most of us get to experience, a Pluto return is something that like a greater body that's alive for longer than a human lifespan will get to experience. So like the nation state identity of the United States, we could think of as a body, brought into formation with that declaration. And now Pluto is returning to the birthplace that it was in when the US was formed. And Pluto is a symbol of, I think, like deep reckoning and the need to look at like shadow material. And so like what hasn't been acknowledged, what's been buried, what's been held in like a taboo or secret space, or what individuals or like collectives refuse to see in themselves.
Yes.
And like that's such a huge part of the US, right? Like there's this like bright shiny identity, and then like a huge amount of suppressed material.
Yes, absolutely.
And so Mercury is stationing in a square with Pluto in Capricorn, and that square influence is like squares push things to do something, like they push things into change, or they kind of can catalyze energy. And then Mercury formed, it's going to form basically three squares. So it formed one on the 22nd of September, which was around the Pisces full moon, which is a big full moon, I think, for a lot of folks. It formed the second one after it had stationed retrograde on the 26th. And then it will form the third at the kind of beginning of November, on November 2nd. And what happens today is that on the new moon, Pluto is also stationing direct. And Pluto's been retrograde since, I think, end of March. But its shadow started last March, right at the beginning of the pandemic. It passed the degree point where it's stationing direct today on March 3rd of 2020. And so I feel like a lot of what has happened in the last 18 months or so, is like what you're speaking to, Karlyn, is kind of like a lot of people being like, how did we get here, like to this time and place where like this, you know, entity, this national body that has this real huge opinion of itself is basically falling into collapse and can't do the things that it purports itself to being able to do. Mm-hmm. And then also during this period of time with Mercury's retrograde, Mercury is forming 3 trines to Jupiter in Aquarius. And so Jupiter is a symbol for growth and expansion, which is kind of like the opposite in some ways of Pluto, which is like death and decay and like what is collapsing down on itself in some ways. And Jupiter is like, what's the possibility? Where is the opportunity? It's moving through Aquarius, which is the sign of the collective. It's also a sign of information and the dissemination of information. And so Mercury has formed its first trine with Jupiter on the 20th of September. It's stationed retrograde. It formed the second trine on October 3rd, just a couple of days ago. And then it'll form its third trine on the 31st. And then Jupiter is also stationing direct. Jupiter has been retrograde, and Jupiter will station direct on the 17th of this month. And so this thing that, what you were talking about, like listening to podcasts, getting information, talking to people, like doing this work is such a symbol, I think, of Jupiter in Aquarius and people talking to each other. So I just kind of wanted to bring that in because like when I heard you talking about what you were thinking about, it was like, absolutely, this is exactly the symbolism of the astrology right now.
Yes.
So with your background is political science and gender and women's studies, and then you're also a consultant. You have, can you talk a little bit about your consulting company for a second?
Yeah, so I started a consulting company. I'm still like building my website and my brand and stuff. But I started a consulting company that's called the High Priestess Consulting Company. And it is a shout out to like a whole bunch of things. So the High Priestess is card number 2 in tarot. I also have been learning tarot, and that the first tarot deck that I actually bought was the Ethereal Visions Tarot, and the card on the box was the High Priestess, and that's what drew me in. So I was like, this is a sign. And so much of like leaning into doing tarot has really been transformative to like my life. So I wanted to like play homage to that. And I also have been using my consulting firm is me basically taking a lot of the things that I have been doing for over a decade. So I've been doing political work. I'm a trained facilitator. I'm a theorist. So I've been a student for forever. So it's really like taking all of these things that I learned and finding like, how do I find a way to put all of these expertise in this one place so that I'm not typecasting myself. And that was interesting too, because like I said, I was listening to your offering for the season, and that was one of the things that was coming up for Capricorn and Libra season was you are really like thinking about what you want your forward facing perspective to be. And so much of this last decade has been me thinking that I had to be one thing, really struggling because I'm like, there are all of these very cool facets of myself, but like the places that I exist in and occupy and am passionate about don't necessarily have like a space for what this looks like for that. And then I kind of have just been like, who cares? Fuck it. I just need to figure out like how to be all of those things that I am at once. And so my consulting firm really feels like me like moving into that space of being like, yes, I do tarot. And some people might think that that's very woo-woo of me, but also I'm a badass theorist, and I also have like a great political analysis, and I'm also an artist, and like all of those things can and do exist at once. And one thing doesn't make doesn't like discredit the work that I do in another place. So
yeah, I mean, I know. So Karlyn, you've been part of the Embodied Astrology community now for like a year or maybe around that or something.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
And
yes.
And in the like tea time spaces and in workshop spaces, like whenever you're there, I feel like our conversations get to go like 1,000 more miles because you're like what you bring in is yeah, super multidimensional. It's like you bring in such a like nuanced like political critique too to talking about the symbolism. And I always get excited when you're there because I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to learn about astrology, you know, because the way that you are able to like reference and reframe a lot of these symbols is like super powerful. And yeah, I was curious definitely to talk to you today, like thinking about the aspects that are happening between like Mercury in its retrograde, but also
Mhm.
Mars. Mars is currently in Libra, and so
Yes.
um, sometimes considered to be the sign of its detriment. Mars is
Yeah,
like,
I heard that, and I was like, I don't
yeah,
know, because I was also listening to Channy yesterday, and she was like, "It's in its detriment," and I was like, "Is it its detriment?" Because
right,
I also like for full like transparency for folks who are listening, like I am like a super novice like baby astrologer, and there are certain things that like that may be controversial like opinions that I hold. So I don't know that I believe in like the language of like detriment because I like I understand what it means, but I'm like with that aspect specifically, I'm like, how can a sister sign be its detriment? I feel like I feel like, and it was listening to you specifically talk about um and it was interestingly enough when you were talking about Capricorn and Cancer as like opposing energies to one another, and I think you were also referencing the United States and how you're like the United States is a Cancer like symbol like in like astrologically, which would mean that its opposite is Capricorn, and here's how like that shows up in the aspects of it, and I really feel like sister sign stuff feels detrimental, but it's not because it's reflective, but it oftentimes reflects back the parts of ourselves or the other half of the thing that we have to like struggle through. And it feels detrimental because it's like in order for you to unlock or really see or appreciate the piece of what the opposite is reflecting to you, it takes a lot of work. And I'm saying this as a person who is, like I said, stacked first house with Capricorn, but my moon is in Cancer in my seventh house, opposed to my first, right?
right,
So I am literally someone who is existing and embodying a lot of
hmm,
um this opposite energy and
yeah,
have had to like struggle through it, and it has felt detriment, like it feels so I understand like the word, I understand like why the term detriment is used because it feels when I am like having to lean heavily into my Cancer moon and I'm having to go against being very rigid and being very formulaic and being very, well, this makes sense to me, so why doesn't it make sense to you? Here's how I came to this like very logical conclusion as a Saturnian ruled person. And my moon is like, but no, people have feelings, including
yeah,
you. And I have to lean into that and I have to sit with the way that being rigid sometimes is very harmful to people. It does feel detrimental to me because I'm just like, oh, this way of seeing the world feels so different, and it feels so foreign, and it feels like I don't have any real grounding. So I understand the word, but I think that like people get stuck in what detriment means to us and like materially that we can't really appreciate that it's just actually reflective. They're actually
hmm,
just showing the necessity of both of those halves.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for saying all that. Alice Sparkly Cat has some really interesting writing, and they did a couple of offerings through their subscription on detriment and affliction with the planets, and I really liked how they were thinking about them. But you know, one thing I think that is always important to like contextualize around astrology is where the language comes from.
Yes.
And so with Mars, like Mars has been honored as a god of war and as like a symbol of machismo and like upright masculinity and things like this. And so in in terms of the essential dignities and planetary rulership of the signs, Mars is associated with its home signs, Aries and Scorpio.
Mm-hmm.
And in those energies, Mars acts completely like unimpeded.
Yes.
And so it's able to move forward like in Aries, like with a lot of warrior-like force. And with Scorpio, with so much kind of penetrating passion. But in Libra, Mars is going to get tempered. Or in Cancer, Mars is going to get tempered. And basically, like, the energy that it conveys, which is an energy of self-determination,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes aggression or violence, or the instinct to individuate and to like be right, to be an individual. Like in Libra, the energy that we're working with is the energy of coming together and unifying, right? And like finding a common ground. And so the idea that Mars is in detriment, I think like the language, like you're saying, is like a place where people get hung up, because the necessity for Mars to apply a warrior-like action then is moving through an energy that needs to come together and find common ground. And so Mars in Libra is a placement that, you know, we can find in people who are incredible social activists and who apply their energy and vigor, and who define themselves as individuals, as people who bring people together.
Yes.
So I love what you were just saying about that. And with Mars in Libra, so a detriment is definitely a tempering. And one thing that I heard, I think I heard this on the Astrology show with Kira Taborn, and I don't remember who she was talking to in that episode, but it was an episode about Mars. And they were talking about Mars in association with steel, and especially with swords.
Yes.
So like, as you know, the instruments of warriors. And they were talking about how swords need to be forged. Mm-hmm. And like whatever the sign that Mars is in is the fire that will forge that sword, or will like strengthen that steel. And so with Mars currently in Libra, we are getting strengthened through the work of relationality, reciprocity, understanding the ideas of justice, and like however we might be orienting to that. And in order to work towards relationship and justice, like, it's fucking hard.
Yes.
You know, and like everything that you were talking about with your Capricorn Cancer polarity of like, you know, really wanting to embody this, you know, Capricorn kind of like steely, reserved ambition, and then being like, oh, actually people have feelings and I do too. Like, doing that balance work I think it's incredibly challenging for all of us in different ways to, you know, figure out the polarities that we embody through our charts, but also that the world around us has been, you know, has grown into. And so like for the United States, as like I have the US chart up right now, and the United States is a Cancer sun, like born on the 4th of July, but it's also an Aquarius moon. It's a Sagittarius rising. It has Neptune right up on the top of the chart. You know, it has a big idea of who it is in terms of a national identity. And so like these larger bodies that we're all held within also have their idiosyncrasies and downfalls and their excesses, you know, and extremes and stuff like that.
And it's learning to like, and I think it's like learning to appreciate and hold the spaces for like the nuances of all of the things that exist within us, right? Which is the journey of being a human, right? It's like, how do we learn, or like, do we ever actually get to learn how to hold all of the places in ourselves as authentically as possible? And sometimes the answer is no. And it's not because like we as an individual don't want to do that. It's because like we may live in a collective where like that's not possible, right?
Right.
And I think that, so I have been thinking really about like the larger aspects of stuff. I have been like fascinated with like some of the bigger stuff that has been going on, some like the slower moving transits, just because I just finished my Saturn return and it was horrible. 10 out of 10, don't recommend. It was really funny because I think that my Saturn return basically completed at the end of last year. But my Saturn return, so I believe Pluto because Pluto makes so many year transits through each sign, though, right? Like it makes like kind of long
14 to 20 years. Yeah, it's a
Yeah, so
long
I
time.
think that if I remember correctly, I think that Pluto entered Capricorn in like the early 2000s. So I was
2008. Yeah.
like, so you said 2008?
Mm-hmm.
So okay, so I was 18 in 2008. And I think that one of the other things that was really interesting, that's like that I was also really thinking about, I was just like, ooh, this actually makes sense for all of the everything. What else happened? What happened in the United States in 2008?
Recession.
Well,
Big banks
I wasn't
falling.
thinking about the
Oh,
recession. I was thinking about something else.
Occupy
Obama was elected.
in 2008.
Yes. And so
Mm-hmm.
the thing that I was thinking about for that to be a really interesting thing to happen when Pluto was entering Capricorn is that I feel like, and I'm like, everybody stay with me because this is me pulling a little bit from like my esotericism from like tarot stuff, is that I feel like sometimes the plant, like when we don't see it when we're in it, but when you sit back and you're just like, wait a second, this was actually, I think that sometimes when certain things are happening, we're given a snapshot of like what is
Mm.
possible,
Mm.
but then we're like, okay, now, so we're seeing what could happen if you do all of the things that you're supposed to when we go through the actual journey that we're going through. So
Mm.
one of the things that Pluto rules death, you know, and it's like destruction, not destruction, but like death, decomposition, the underworld, shadow stuff, right? So the fact that Pluto was like, I'm going to enter Capricorn, which rules structures, government, right? And here is this person who, for so many people, is demonstrating to us what that it actually is materially possible for us to have governance in a way that's different, right? Because there's been all kinds of things that have happened in the United States for forever that have demonstrated we need actual huge change,
Yep.
right? And then here, like President Obama was like, hi, I'm that thing, right? And a lot of us actually bought into that narrative. We were just like, oh my gosh, this is the thing, this is the person, this is the way that we have been wanting things to be, right? This is the vision that we have of ourselves, of America, of the future. And I feel like the Pluto making its transit through Capricorn was like, great, here is
Yep.
all of the shit that I'm going
That
to
needs to get
reveal
dealt
to
with.
you, that you have to get rid of, that you have to move through, that you have to mourn, that you have to grieve. You have to go through this death process in order for actual
Mm-hmm.
transformation to come out on the other end. And the way that I kind of came to that was thinking about some of the other transits that are happening right now too. So we have Chiron in Aries. We have Uranus is still making its transit through Taurus, right? So there's two. So Chiron is like, heal. Here's Pluto went through 12 years of showing all of you what the fuck you actually like have not dealt with, and I'm bringing everything to the surface. From your structures, I'm revealing to you how your government ain't shit, is not working properly. I'm showing you as a society all of the ills that you have. I'm bringing it all to the surface so there's no confusion about what's stopping us from like getting to the place that we want to be. Because I think that's another Capricorn quality, right? A Capricorn, if you ask me how you want to do something, I will literally read you for filth and be like, here are all of the ways that you do not have the things that you need to in order to reach the goal that you want. And here are the things that I think you need to do in order to build the infrastructure for you to be able to not only meet but sustain this goal that you have said that you have for yourself, right? So Pluto moving through Capricorn was like, you say that you want hope and you want a beautiful vision and you want a great government and you want to be post-racial and you want to do all that other shit that you say that you do. Here's this person that I'm putting into this place to highlight to you how you are not actually ready for any of that.
So, okay, just to interject quickly, Obama has an Aquarius rising and has Jupiter in Aquarius in the first house. And so, like, the title of his book, like The Audacity of Hope, you know, is such a Jupiterian title. I was thinking, and so last year, on the solstice, December 21st, 2020, there was the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in the first degree of Aquarius.
Yes.
And Jupiter and Saturn come together every 20 years. In Hellenistic astrology, it was thought of that, like, their 20-year cycles would pertain to new rulership, right? Like a new king being crowned or something like that.
Yeah.
And that every 200 years, the elements of their conjunctions change. And so in 2020, it was considered to be like the name is called the Great Mutation, which is so amazing, I think. But it's a shift. It was a shift from these conjunctions in the earth element to conjunctions in the air element. And so a new cycle is kind of opening up around Aquarian themes, and Aquarian themes in some part relating to the people power, the collective, dissemination, like broad vision and dissemination of information and the future, which Obama certainly embodied and like ran his campaign on.
And innovation too, because you're
innovation.
Well, I know, so I know like the modern ruler of Aquarius is Uranus, like innovation, right? And that's like what we're being asked to do that, right? We have to think about how we do things differently. And I feel like what happened was with the, you know, the transit of Pluto through Capricorn is that it was like the more we didn't deal, or like I think it was like as it progressed, it showed us like, here's a preview of what could be, but like here's all of the things that you have to deal with. And a lot of us, like, it got progressively worse, and then like Trump got elected, right? Because we were just like, wow, we saw how good things could kind of maybe possibly be, and then it was like, oh, there's all of this bad stuff. Sorry, there's a plane flying over. Tucson has an Air Force base, so sometimes military planes fly by.
Speaking of Capricorn,
was like, here is, okay, I'm revealing to you like how deep this goes though, right? And that's the thing that I think that Trump was like, here is the depths of like how much work has to be done in order for you all to get to this place that you think that you have been this whole time that you haven't been, right?
Right.
And then I think that we're kind of seeing a little bit more of that culmination, but then we're being asked now, how do we heal? What do we heal, right? With Chiron in Aries, we're being asked, how do we like exist differently because we have to, right? With and how do we innovate new ways of existing and think of new ways of being, with Uranus making its transit through Taurus. And then I think that I'm like, this feels like a perfect conversation to have on a Libra new moon, right? Like, how do we literally rethink how we're in relationship to one another?
Yep.
And how do we bring back balance to the individual versus the collective? Because we're in this moment where we are seeing the way that the self is corrupt, like the idea of self and being so fixated on the idea of self is corrupting our ability to exist in the collective, right? Like, how many people are like, I have a right to not be vaccinated, for example, because I think that as an individual, I shouldn't have to do this thing, not thinking about the impact that it has on the collective, right? But that is a symptom being revealed to us of the larger things that have been unearthed to us about how we have been taught to exist and how that way of existence, like, it is not sustainable. Like, our society is collapsing, right? Our government is collapsing. Our world is falling apart. And all of those things, I think those things feel extreme, right? Because to like kind of loop this back to what I was saying earlier in our conversation, so many of us have not had the ability, and that like ability being like we don't have access to resources being time, money, technology, whatever, to really be able to sit down and see and look at what has been happening for the last like 50 years that has set the stage for this moment where everything feels like it's on fire, like figuratively and literally, right? And
Yeah.
it's like this didn't just happen in a vacuum, it didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't just one decision, it was a whole bunch of convoluted, very some slow moving, some of it is like some of it was malice, some of it was like incompetence, some of it was just happenstance, right? That has created this moment that we're in. But we have a decision to make where we are like, all of the cards are on the table. We see, we truly can see everything for what it is. And now we're having to decide how do we move forward, right?
Hmm.
Like, what do we
Hmm.
do? Like, and I think that, as what do we do as a collective? And I think that specifically as different people who are different kinds of practitioners, right? Like you're an astrologer, and I think that you're doing your role. How do you speak to people who are also, astrological practitioners and speak to them in a way of like, here's what your responsibility is, and here's how you can use being someone who's a practitioner of astrology to like benefit the collective and to help people heal and to help people do work and to help people kind of like see the bigger picture of some of the
Yeah.
themes outside of just being like, my chart is cool and I can read your chart for you too. Like, I really love the way that you apply astrology to historical events, and like you are speaking like politics to people in a language that they understand, and that's important, right? Like that is part of the work of the collective, and how I think that we're gonna like get ourselves out of this thing that like many of us didn't create, right? We just kind of like ended up in it.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like astrology is one of many languages that can help us like connect with a larger framework of some kind.
Yeah.
And with astrology, what I love is that it is always working with time. And so it's working with history, but it's also working with the future
Yes.
and helping us recognize that in the present moment, we're participating in both the past and the future.
Yes.
And I think today's new moon is like an incredible symbol of that because of, first of all, the new moon being conjunct with Mercury and Mars. Mercury being in this retrograde that is tying in cycles of Pluto and
Mhm.
Jupiter. Pluto being representative of, again, like it's like a death force, right? And so what hasn't anything that lives is going to die and it's going to have to decompose. But
Yes.
also when the identity of a like living organism becomes a form, right? So like when we're identifying with the form itself, then whatever the process is of decay, it will necessarily include like the ego death or the death of the identity,
Yes.
whether that's like, I mean, I'm speaking within the human sphere. I don't know what it's like to be a tree or something like that, if a tree is going to like struggle with not being a tree as it starts to die. But for human beings, and certainly for the things that we create, like businesses or organizations or countries, there's so much emphasis put into perpetuity, and it's like, now I've made this and I've got to be this way forever, and like these
Yes.
ideas of I'm going to put something into a form and then that form is going to be a permanent form, and that in and of itself is counter to evolutionary life force. And so what Pluto does is it shows us what is not functioning for the evolution anymore, and it forces us to face like the death force that we embody and that we create. And in this process of decay, there's also the kind of symbolism or the archetype of the phoenix, right? Like that we're going to be reborn into something, that everything that dies will end up kind of decomposing, but then becoming compost, becoming the fertile grounds for new life. And so part of what's happening right now, I think, with this Mercury retrograde is that collectively and personally and interpersonally, we're in some kind of process of looking at like what needs to die. what is already dying, what have I been trying to like, you know, grasp onto and like hold on to. And
Absolutely.
a lot of what Pluto's energy can do is push us into controlling, manipulative, power hungry behavior where it's like, I will not give up you know, like I can't let it die. But then on the other hand, we've got Pluto in trine with Jupiter and Aquarius, and it's going, we can have a new dream. Like this can be a new vision. And in the new vision, there's actually a vision of community. And in community, there is diversity. And in diversity, there is a lot of multitude of perspective on how did we get here? What do we need? And like, what's going to be important? And when I was looking at the Sabian symbol for today, and for folks that don't know, Sabian symbols refer to the 360 degrees of the zodiac. Every single degree has a meaning to it. And so the new moon today at 13 degrees is a Sabian symbol for imaginative play. 13 degrees of Libra is like imaginative play, when humans come together. And there was this image of like blowing bubbles, like having like creating worlds together. And like these worlds are, they're fictions and they're temporary. But imaginative play is like, you know, when I think about like, how are we going to get into the future? I feel like a lot of the theorists that I'm really resonating with right now are theorists that are going, okay, we need to look at the past and understand what has happened in the past, but we also need to try to not recreate the past. Because we're going somewhere else. And in order to get to the place that we want to be, we have to like be with the trouble of what is right now. So we really have to comprehend what has happened, but we can't go backwards in time. We have to move forward, and to get to what we haven't done yet, we have to imagine it first, and we have to like imagine our way into it. And then the last thing I'll say is that, well, two more things. So one, tomorrow Venus is moving into Sagittarius. I know that's your natal placement, so happy Venus return.
Venus is Sag, and I'm just, I have such a weird relationship with that placement, because I feel it is very much me being like, why does no one pay attention to me? And then when people do pay attention to me romantically, I'm like, you girls, leave me alone. You will not.
You're like, I need space. Don't cramp my style.
Very much that.
Well, I mean, what I love about Venus and Sagittarius, and I like really feel this in you, and I don't know if you resonate with this, but I feel like a lot of the beauty that you exude and emanate, and like those are Venus words, like beauty, like emanate, and like magnetize and attract. It's like Sagittarius is big vision, it's buoyant, it's optimistic, it's also wise, it's a teacher, and it's a journeyer. And like anytime I've been in shared space with you, like the beauty that you emanate is this beauty of possibility, you know, and like good humored wisdom. And you've got all your Capricorn in there, like bringing it down to earth, you know, but it's like you're constantly bringing vision in. And I feel like Venus in Sag like does that for us. And Venus is the ruler of this new moon. It's the ruler of Libra. And today it's leaving Scorpio and then moving into Sagittarius. It'll ingress at like 4 or 5 in the morning tomorrow. And so this is a moment where like within the astrological kind of color palette or the wheel, it's like this cuspy energy from Scorpio into Sag is the energy of the Phoenix rising. You know, it's like, okay, like we've gone all the way into the depth of something. We've burned it all up. And now like what can happen from here? And then, there was something else I wanted to say, but now I forgot it. It's gone. But anyway, that was a tangent. Venus and Sagittarius took me somewhere else.
I love what you were saying about, I think you, is Pluto, did you say that it's squaring or is it trining with Jupiter? And no, not Jupiter. I'm just like,
so Mercury is forming 3 squares to Pluto over the course of its retrograde, because it basically stationed in a square. So it squared it, and then a couple days later, retrograde squared again. The same thing with a trine to Jupiter. So Mercury is square with Pluto and then trine with Jupiter.
Okay. So I think that the things that are really important about that for us to think about are that we're literally being asked to think about, right? Because Mercury rules communication and thought. What are the things that we are imagining for expansion, but we can't expand because we're clinging to things that are either dead or dying,
Yes.
right? So like we're literally being out, and I think that that's like, that is so apparent in like what's happening with the government, right? Just I'll use the government as
Totally. It's a great example.
as a great example, right? Is there is a lack of imagination, right? And I think that one of the things that's really interesting to me, thinking about like the American political system, like specifically because like that's where I live in the United States, is whenever we think about the word conservative, or like even I like to compare it to like conservation, is we like don't stop to think like, what are the things that we are trying to preserve, and are those things actually things
worth
that
it
need to be preserved, right? And like when then I think about that, specifically how in the United States we have pinned the word conservative and like progressive as like the kind of extreme polar opposites of one another. And I'm like, what are the things I'm like, what are the things that we are clinging to with like being rooted in conservative ideas or values that are like literally hindering us from being able to progress, right? Because I think that both of those words are like oftentimes used as bad words. One of them has a worse connotation like materially than the other one does, right? But then the other one I think sometimes is like misconstrued. And I think that this goes back to another part that we were having earlier in our conversation, right? They're a reflection of each other. They're not necessarily, like, on their own, they're not bad. But materially, they can be if we're not sitting with what it is that we're actually like saying and meaning when we're using those two things to reflect one another. And so I really think that these planetary placements are asking for us to sit with like, what is it that we like, what are we wanting to expand, like what are we wanting to create, what is needed for expansion, and like what things are we holding on to that aren't allowing for us to do that. And so like something a really good metaphor just like downloaded to me right now is sort of like I'm going to use like a very capitalistic example, so I apologize, but this is what came through. So like if you have a business, for example, and if you have a cute little boutique, for let's say you start out with a cute little boutique, but then the space is small and you're doing great, but then you need to expand to a bigger space because the little space that you're in like doesn't allow for you to do the things that you need to do. Like practically we would say, oh, buy a bigger space, right? Expand to a bigger space so that you can do the things that you want to do. Like, so right, so like I feel like that is a very practical way for us to see how we'd be like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. If you start out small and then you start growing, your business is expanding, and you want to be able to service more customers, or you want to be able to sell more crystals and more books and whatever, hire more staff. Like the natural progression we would say to someone is like, oh yeah, like buy a bigger space. And if the person was like, oh, but I really like, this space is so sentimental to me because it's the first space that I had and this is where I started and it has been so good to me, we'd be like, yeah, that's great, and we totally understand that and that makes sense. And also you're saying that you want to have this and you're dreaming of doing that. Buy another space, move into somewhere that allows for that to happen. And it's so interesting that I'm able to say this, and I'm sure that like we're like, that totally makes sense, and the people listening are like, yeah, right. But then how often in our lives though, when we are asked to expand, like it doesn't feel that easy to do that, right? It feels nonsensical. because like we're humans and we're emotional and we're not rational all the time, and all of those other things also matter, right? That there is that sentimentality like is important, and I think that we are really struggling as a collective, specifically in the US, to provide people space to grieve, right?
Yeah.
That sentiment that they had of like, what did this country mean to some people? What did and like how that sadness matters, and also we have to move on to something different because this thing is dying, and like that's okay, and it's sad that it's dying, and we can be sad, and also we can be excited about what the future looks like. And I don't know that we have done a very good job at like holding that kind of in between space of like, there is grief when something does die, but death is also a transformation, right? Death,
Mm-hmm.
in tarot, the death card, I think it's the tower card. I think it's the tower card, the death card, and then the star card. So the tower card is kind of like the warning, right? It's like something is about to fall apart.
Mm.
Right? It is like something is coming to an end. Something is this is a gentle warning. Well, depending on what other cards are with it, it could be like, this is a gentle warning that like the bottom's about to fall out. Like this thing is crumbling, it's coming down. There will be you cannot rebuild from this.
Mm-hmm.
Then the death card is like, the tower has fallen, right? And then, or I think, or maybe it might be death, tower, star, but the star card symbolizes a new beginning. It is like you have been stripped bare. It feels frustrating because it feels like like you have to start from scratch, you have to start over, but there is something renewing and replenishing about being able to start from scratch. And I think the thing that is also really important for us to think about too is that just because something transforms, we don't lose the knowledge, we don't lose the lessons, right? We don't lose any of the other stuff that came from whatever it is that we're letting go of, right? All of that stuff stays with us. It just turns
Mm.
into something different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love how you're talking about expansion, and I think that that's very Jupiterian, very Jupiter and Aquarius kind of idea of like, we need to expand, we need to include more, we need to build our vision of what could be. And then I'm thinking about these squares with Pluto and Capricorn, and specifically thinking about something that I heard from Amber McZeal, and I just want to tell people to go follow her at Decolonizing the Psyche. I took a workshop with her a couple of weeks ago on decolonization and somatics. And one of the things that she said that really hit for me is that trauma limits the imagination, or it stops the imagination. And
Absolutely.
so, like, in this kind of place where it's like, yeah, things are breaking down and there's a lot of death, and there is a necessity to transform these killing forces that have been very instrumental within the formation of the United States as a body, you know, in the ways that we've all internalized them through our internalized isms and whatnot. There's so much trauma. There's so much collective and personal trauma, and the trauma is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, trauma limits the imagination and puts us in spaces of survival and fear. And it pushes us out of our frontal lobe, which is the place where we can imagine the future, and into the reptilian parts of our brain that are like, I gotta just protect myself and, you know, get whatever I need and grasp onto my resources and stuff like that.
Yes.
And so part of what I feel like a lot of folks are doing in these kinds of conversations that look at how did we get to where we are now is that they're unpacking trauma.
Yes.
And that part of this process of Pluto and Capricorn is like allowing the historical trauma of the United States and its colonial lineage to come forth.
Yes.
And it's asking all of us to metabolize it, and to metabolize it quickly.
Yes.
And you mentioned a 50-year cycle, which I thought was interesting because Chiron cycle is 50 years. And so 50 years ago, Chiron was also transiting Aries. And part of what Chiron is representative of is a psychological process and is the healing journey. It's like, how do we build language and concept that can be container and vessel for healing? And in the last 50 years, a lot of language and theory has arisen that allows us to be doing the work that's happening now, right? Of like looking at these historic traumas and then imagining into the future, and then doing what you are saying, which is like reckoning with the kind of violence between the individual and the collective, or the individual and the community, and the state of individualism that's been like very elevated by like a Western machismo culture that is so discontinuous with the life force. Because it's like I was talking to a friend the other day who's a cis het guy, and we were talking about individualism, and he said, he like within the course of our conversation, he was like, whoa, this is the first time I actually realized that my concept of individualism is non-relational. Yes. And that like he'd been kind of holding an idea of like the individual, it's like I can be free, I can like do my own thing. And that it was like the first time that something was starting to click for him, that concept was not rooted in relationality, and that he was like, I think I want to reframe how I'm thinking of being an individual.
Yes, because you can't like, and that's the thing. It was really funny. I was at the doctor's the other day. And I was talking to my doctor, and I was letting her know about how I had a podcast. And I was like, any person who says that they are a self-made man, I was like, they're full of shit. Because I was like, I've been doing a lot of this stuff for my podcast by myself. And I was like, and like, it's hard. And I recognize that there's only so much that I can do as an individual person, right? Yeah. And so I think, yes, right. I think that we have wrongfully framed individualism, where we're like, oh, people are self-made, or people can make it on their own. And like, that's not true. We have just masked all of the other people who are like holding up, right? Or like, so totally. I think that one of the things that you had just mentioned too, about the United States and all of its fuckery, is I think that we are, what's also being revealed to us is all of the ways that the United States has intentionally created systems that keep so many of us in perpetual states of survival. Those things have been like intentionally manufactured, so that we can't imagine things, right? We're so tired from working all the time. We're so tired from being overworked and underpaid. We're stressed out all the time because we know that, we're only one paycheck away from being evicted, right? Like, there's all of these things that capitalism and white supremacy have created that keep us in perpetual states of stress, of survival, that have been manufactured to the detriment of the collective for a handful of individuals, right? And I think that that is being so starkly shown for us that we can't ignore it, and we can't explain it away. And some of the tools that have happened, I think, in the past, that have allowed for some of like the gaslighting to happen, like the gaslighting still exists, but I think that it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the stories. Or what I think the other piece that we're seeing is in order for that maintenance to happen, the extremities of like the lies that are being told, or like the way that like reality has to be literally shifted in order for the story to hold, is kind of what we're seeing, right? We're seeing the response to folks are the veil has been lifted. We see that the wizard is actually just the stage magician, and like we can't unsee it. And so Yeah, I think that I agree that it's hard for us to, I think it's hard for people to imagine things. And I have to name that I have been in a space where I have had the ability to like stay at home and listen to podcasts all day and to think about things and to like be in community and talk and like share ideas with people. And like that's not true for a lot of folks. So I also know that I do feel I have a responsibility to figure. I'm like trying to figure out what do I do with that, right? Because it's not good enough for me to be like, well, okay, I understand this and that's cool. So fuck everyone else. I'm like, how do I disseminate this information to people? How do I try to create spaces where this information is as accessible as possible for all of the different ways that people may need for it to be, because people are out here surviving, right? And how so like that, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, just to respond to what you said, like I'm loving that in the reimagining of what we could be, you know, in terms of like whatever the future of our collective bodies is going to look like, that especially within the like the abolition work, you know, in movement work that's looking at like deconstruction of police state, what is being called out is that these structures and institutions of violence are functioning with this really mutated and sick idea of the individual, where it's like all of this blame is being put on individuals, like, oh, this person is this bad person, they need to like go be locked up and they're dangerous to the community, etc. And that there hasn't been a holistic view of like, how did this person come to this place in their life or their choices, or what were the larger structures that are framing this person in this very negative light. And that has been a very concentrated, intentional, and conscious effort on the part of the state. And that what is being kind of reimagined are systems of care that are holistic systems that care for the community and the individuals within the community, and go like, oh, if a person has their basic needs met, if they have housing, if they have food, if they have access to education, if they can like live in peace with the people that are family for them, there's a really fucking good chance that they're not going to be out there like trying to harm other people or trying to harm themselves. And that, right, so these like symptoms of or kind of like symbols of fear that have kind of been embodied within the culture are being seen for what they are, which is the cultural shadow.
And I think that you just like, I want to say this thing real quick, is that I think that you touch on, you even through mentioning that, reveal when it is, who is allowed to be a part of a collective, right? Because I think that there is it's when it comes to, you know, white men, it's like when something goes wrong with them, we have failed them, right? How come their community? What went wrong?
We need to help them.
What did we do? How can
Let's
we
send them
do
to
better
rehab.
next time? Right. When it comes to white men, or I would even say white people collectively, when something happens in white communities, we are, you know, the nation says, how did we go wrong? Where did we go wrong? What did we do for this to happen, for us to fail these people? Which is fine, right? I do think that we need to because we live in a society, right? So yes, I do think I am a firm believer that like I am responsible, or I hold some responsibility to the people that I'm in community with, right? I can't be responsible for everything, but I always have found it weird when folks are like, I'm not worried about this person. And I'm like, but they're your friend. Why are you not worried about them? Like, why are you not concerned about the decisions they're making? Why are you not concerned about like what they do or don't have access to? Like, why are we not worried about the folks that are, like, we're in about each other, right? And that does come from, we have been socialized to think, and then depending on the types of identities you have, there are these narratives about those people, that person, that community, they need to worry about themselves, right? They are like that because of
they're gonna pull themselves up by the bootstraps and fix their,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes. And that is so like that is, and the way that, you know, we or like we're dysfunctioning is because we have been giving these really harmful ideas about what we're supposed to, who we're supposed to be as individuals based on our gender, race, sexual orientation, etc. And then there are certain people who are like clinging to that idea, and there are certain folks who have other ideas and identities that are like, actually, we're doing more of the collective work because we recognize that we hold each other down, and that is actually how we survive. That is actually how we thrive, is when we are worried about each other, when we are looking at one another, and we are sharing resources with each other, and when we as people can be a resource to each other, and it doesn't feel transactional, and it doesn't feel, oh, well, I can't, if I give you this thing now, you have to be able to give me something in return. It's just like, no, you don't have this thing and you need it. And like the compassionate thing to do, the just thing to do, the moral thing to do is to like help you because I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're saying is making me think about like this other side of Pluto and Capricorn in terms of like the transformation of the past and the transformation of the structures of the past, which I feel like your generation, because you're born in 1991,
No,
is
I was
that,
born in
did I get
88.
that? 88. Okay. Um, so you're part of the generation that has Neptune and Uranus
Yes.
in Capricorn,
Yes.
which is a fairly large generation from the late 80s through the late 90s. And these are two outer, slow moving planets that kind of like, as a very brief synopsis, would symbolize both an awakening and an innovation, as well as like a deep dream and a longing and a transformation of longing, um, of historical structures.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like one thing that y'all, like as a cohort, are so adept in is like doing the work that you've just been doing of like kind of dismantling these institutional oppressions and like historical frameworks, but also reconnecting and remembering ancestral wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And within that ancestral wisdom is like an indigenous wisdom that I would say is worldwide, that at some point, like, we all come from people that knew reciprocity
Yes.
and like lived in a manner of reciprocity and like divine relationship. And however that was embodied, I don't know, but it's like, you know, we are not here alone. Like, who the fuck knows how we got here? We got here through some kind of magic. We completely rely upon each other and our environment in order to survive, and not just to survive but also to thrive. Like,
Mm-hmm.
right relationship, I mean, coming back to the Libra new moon, like, to be in friendship. Whoops. You were like, yes. Like, to be in friendship and to be in like harmony and collaboration with other people is so, and like to make art together, you know, to like do Libra stuff in the like depth of what Libra can be, you know, which I think is like art, beauty, right relationship. It's like, this is the stuff that life is about, you know,
Yes.
like this is the sweetness of life. It's not like, oh my God, like I'm going to start a company and make $1 gazillion and insulate myself from the world and have my own private army. Like, fuck that, you know, like, what happens when we are in the kind of community that can like be expansive and playful and spontaneous and imaginative?
Yes. Yes.
Maybe, maybe, is that a good segue to like talk about your event on Saturday that you have coming up?
I think so. Yeah. Yes. So I
Looking
have
for the segue.
an event happening on Saturday. So one of the things I mentioned is I have a podcast. It's called Beneath the Surface. You should check it out. And I'm going to be having my first virtual event. And so I am going to be, so it's a continuation of a conversation that happened last year with two other Black femmes who are organizers in Arizona. So we are going to be reconvening, and we're going to be talking about anti-Blackness, We're going to be talking about our political analysis of like this moment that we're in, some of the things that are happening in Arizona, lessons that we have learned as a nation or not. So it's going to be a really great conversation. The two folks that I'm going to be in conversation with are Tia Rainey and Tia Oso. They are two super dope, rad Black femmes who are organizers, who are theorists, who are scholars, who I have the true pleasure of being able to call friend. And it's going to be a great conversation. Like, if you have loved this, you're going to love that too. So yes,
and people can pre-register, right, to like attend the live event.
Pre-register. So if you want to follow me on my Instagram, which is k.d.bradley, I have been posting it there. I think Renee has also shared it on the Embodied Astrology page, so folks can register. It will be at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then it will be recorded for folks who may not be able to make it. It's happening this Saturday. So folks are like, oh my gosh, this sounds great, but I have something to do, or it's going to be like a weird time in the world where I am. It will be recorded, so folks will be able to watch it later. But if you're one of those folks who like, you're interested, but you're not sure if you can make it, still register, because I'll send an email out to where folks can find it afterwards.
I love the name of your podcast. And I just like, I was like, oh, this is so perfect to be talking about this with you today, because on the 9th is the day that Mercury forms the inferior solar conjunction, and that Mercury and Mars form their conjunction. And so there's like this triple conjunction of the Sun, Mercury, and Mars that corresponds with today's new moon. And it's, if we count the new moon, the Mercury-Mars conjunction, and then both Mars and Mercury conjoining the Sun, that's 4 cycles that are all in processes of ending and then beginning anew. And Libra is a lot of times, like, you'll hear people talk about Libra as the surface or the superficial, and in the way that Libra can be representative of the law or ideas of justice, it's like it can be based on aesthetic and preference and precedent. Yes. But in order to do the work of Libra, we have to go deeper. We have to go beneath the surface. Yes. And so I love that this is like the title of your podcast, and that this event is really like doing this work, I think, of that triple conjunction of Mercury, Mars, and the Sun coming together in the middle of Libra and going like, what is underneath this? Yes.
That's
so I'm super excited.
That happened too, because that was like, I thank you for like naming that. And that feels like such a divine intervention, because the event was supposed to happen last month, but we, like the organizers, we were like, this feels like a really fast turnaround. We were like, let's like slow down and like push it back a little bit, and look at the divine just out here.
Look at it. It's also the day
on powerful days of planetary alignment.
Well, it's also the day that Venus, so Venus goes into Sagittarius tomorrow, and then on the 9th, Venus will form a conjunction with the South Node. And the South Node is one of the eclipse points. And so for folks who are excited about eclipses, we're coming up on eclipse season next month, and we'll be having the last eclipse of the Gemini Sagittarius sequence that started in June of 2020. And so one of the things that's representative of the South Node in Sagittarius is letting go of old philosophies that have become too rigid and too pompous and self-important for their own good, and expanding them or exploding them by talking to each other, and basically like letting go of ideas of hierarchical knowledge and engaging in conversation with one another, so that we can get more curious and open our minds and see things from different points of view. So it just feels like a really incredible day for you to be having this event. And for anybody that's joining, you should definitely sign up and either join the live event or get the recording, because I think it'll be really interesting if you're interested in the topics that we've been looking at and what Karlyn is working with.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I am excited to keep talking with you, Karlyn, over the coming however long we get to keep talking. I hope a long time.
Yes.
But thank you for joining me today. And folks, please go follow Karlyn at K, is it K dot D?
It's K.D. Bradley.
K.D. Bradley.
Yes.
And then you've just formed your consulting company. And so if anyone out there is looking for a consultant, what's your like dream client? Like, who do you really like? What do you really want to bring to people who you work with?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think that my dream client it is like people who are like actually wanting to do the work, because that's when I feel excited. Like when we are like excited to be in conversation with one another, right? So it's like people who are curious and are really wanting to learn, and who are wanting to really do the work. Because like I said, I'm a Capricorn. I got baby, I got 5 Capricorn places, my first house. Like, if you bring me in, you're like, how can I fix this thing? I am going to tell you, right? And so and that's not for everyone. Everybody is not ready to hear. Here are all of the ways that you and your organization ain't shit, right? Everybody's not ready to hear that. So like folks who really though are open to that idea, who are really committed to the process, and who recognize that like transformation is hard and that there is a process of grief, of letting things go, but who are excited about the opportunity and the possibility of transformation, and who want to put in the work, and who also have money to pay me.
So Karlyn you sent me your High Priestess Consulting Company kind of like pamphlet, and it looks so amazing. And so I just maybe also want to give a plug and say that Karlyn's offering all kinds of different workshops on racial justice, on intersectionality, on anti-Blackness, on social justice, also becoming more politically engaged, like understanding how to participate with local politics, on leading and recruiting diverse populations. So there's a lot of offering and gift that Karlyn brings, and along with your background in political science and gender and women's studies and activism and organizing, you're also a witch and a tarot reader and a burgeoning astrologer, and so you're going to bring all that in too, which is like an incredible offering. So definitely keep Karlyn's name around and share it with anybody that you know that might be looking for this kind of consult.
Yes. And then also make sure, if you loved this conversation and you want to hear more of my thoughts on things, definitely check out my podcast, Beneath the Surface. It is available on a lot of streaming services, so like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or I think is what it's called. I don't have an Android, so I don't know what the fuck Google stuff is. But it's on all of those. And then you can also follow Beneath the Surface on all the social media. So on here on Instagram, it's BT Surface Pod. So yes.
Yeah, I'll include that in today's story on Embodied Astrology too. So if anybody missed the links, they'll be there. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Karlyn, and thanks to everybody who joined.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was so much fun. Happy new moon to everyone.
Happy new moon. Everyone take care out there, and make sure to breathe and be in your body and find ways to enjoy beauty today, because it's a Libra new moon, and Libra is served by balance and beauty. So
yes.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye.